We now turn again to higher ed for a discussion on how to reimagine our current university model and make it more accessible. Joining me now are two experts on the subject. They're beyond experts. They're it. Anant Agarwal is the founder and CEO of edX, an online learning platform that offers more than 3,000 online courses from universities like MIT and Harvard. He's also a professor of electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. And Mamie Voight is the Interim President of the Institute for Higher Education. She focuses on affordability, transparency, and the importance of post-secondary data policy in achieving education equity. Anant, it's great to see you again, my friend, and it's been a while. We're sitting here in a pandemic. I mean, I always thought when we met and talked many years ago, when I was at another publication, that you were the future, that everything you were like. Now we have a pandemic, and folks need edX more than ever. What have you learned in this time and crisis? And I just want to, just throw one other element there. Are you finding the hunger for your online courses as great in the United States as I know it is tsunami-like from abroad?
The hunger for education, and particularly online education, has taken on, I love your term, tsunami proportions. I'm going to use that. And by the way, great to see you again. It was amazing. In March of last year, when the pandemic truly came and hit our shores, the interest in online learning went exponential. We had a tenfold increase in the number of people registering on edX than just a month before. And we've seen courses and programs that were popular before, like computer science, business, and data science, as well as topics like pandemics and Ebola. Of course, how to use ventilators. Just an amazing interest in all kinds of courses during this time, and from students all over the world, whether it was the US or India or Africa or Australia, an exponential increase in interest during all of this time. And people were particularly looking for short courses and certifications from top institutions that they could use to bolster their resumes, either because they were looking to upskill in their current jobs or because they had been furloughed or laid off and they wanted to come out stronger following the pandemic.
You just heard Jeffrey. I don't know if you heard Jeffrey Canada. He's an incredibly fascinating, innovative education, different level of the education spectrum than you are. And he just said, he just described sort of what he hoped we would need: great teachers, scale, online. He described your company, but the other end. Do you have any interest in expanding into Jeffrey Canada land?
Jeffrey and I have been on panels together before, and we need to be careful about one thing, though. Oftentimes, first of all, we want to expand and collaborate, and Jeffrey Canada's work is absolutely amazing. At the same time, we need to recognize that people often mistake online learning for learning that does not involve great teachers and interaction with great teachers.
Right.
Our youths today, whether they are coming out of the cradle or going into careers, are very excited about online and all things digital. In fact, my daughter, I saw her watching a video one day on her iPhone, and I asked her, "What are you watching?" And it turned out that she was watching the Green Brothers. This is Hank and John Green, who are icons, and they teach all kinds of cool things. And frankly, few adults know who they are, but every kid does. But these are all online personalities. And I think great teachers, great teaching, great enthusiasm, excitement, motivation, all of this can be conveyed online as easily as it can be conveyed in person. And frankly, the beauty of online is that it increases access dramatically. How many people have a chance to go to an online, show or a concert by the Green Brothers? But online, tens and hundreds of millions of people can have access. And I think in the same way with education, we can do the same using edtech, digital technology, to make education, whether high school level or college level, or for employees at companies, available to people all over the world to improve in their careers, to upskill, reskill for the future of work.
Thank you. Mamie, I know that you work in the, you work with data. I love people who work with data because, one of the challenges in this business, in media covering, is we're always looking for that unique boutique story, right, of somebody, and sometimes we make assumptions on causality we shouldn't make. Sometimes we presume things we shouldn't presume. data are very much the answer when it comes to policy. And I'm interested in, how we move from these boutique feel-good stories or feel-bad stories to something where we're going to get smarter by understanding the habits, the norm, the promising practices in education, particularly post-secondary education, that you think matter most because that's where the data takes us. Is that an okay on-ramp into this?
Absolutely. And the issues that you raise around data are really key to understanding the issue of how to deal with the current pandemic and the ways that it's really upended our higher education system. And I think it helps to get to some of the issues that Anant is raising as well about, pairing quality, good teaching with various different types of modalities for getting the information to students so that they can engage thoughtfully with it. This all ties into a conversation around the value of post-secondary education. And this is something that folks were talking about before the pandemic. Issues of post-secondary value. Polling routinely shows that issues of college affordability and student debt are top concerns for the American public. And the pandemic has really just deepened the focus on these questions around value because of how the shift has happened so rapidly to online learning in not always the ways with the ability to build in that thoughtful pedagogies into the delivery of the materials. And so we see that the pandemic is making these questions all the more pressing, especially for Black, Latinx, Indigenous students, underrepresented Asian and Pacific Islander students, and students from low-income backgrounds, and women, all of whom have been disproportionately impacted by the upheaval that the pandemic has caused from an economic standpoint, from a social standpoint, from an educational standpoint. And so, you talk about the data and the evidence, and what the evidence shows is that the returns to post-secondary education are real, they are measurable, they are substantial. That when individuals and when society invest in post-secondary education, they realize real returns to that post-secondary education in terms of economic mobility. However, we also see that value depends all too much on a person's race, ethnicity, income, and gender, and it absolutely shouldn't. And the pandemic is deepening these inequities that we already see within our higher education system in a number of ways. For one, when we look at the data, we see that enrollments for next year, applications and financial aid applications for college next fall, while they're up at some of the most selective colleges, they're down for less selective institutions. They're down for first-generation college goers and for low-income students. For example, we've seen that at the State University System of New York, they've had a 20% decline in applications for next year. And so this is a real signal to how students are navigating this question of post-secondary value during the time of online learning. We've seen similar results in the data when looking at FAFSA applications, so new applicants for federal financial aid, and see that they're down across the board by 10%. And the largest declines are among Title I schools and schools with high proportions of students of color. And so while we imagine that the surge of ed tech and the surge of online opportunities will help to open doors to more students, it's not doing that right now. And it can only do that if we're really deliberate about questions of equity, especially in making sure that students have equitable access to broadband and to the technology that they need to be able to access the coursework, making sure that people have a quiet place to study and to complete their coursework, which is especially difficult now when we're quarantining at home with our families.
Right.
And then low-income folks and people of color have been disproportionately harmed by the economic impacts of the pandemic, making it all the more difficult to afford a post-secondary education.
I love that two of you are paired together because, Mamie, when I hear from you about what some of the data are saying about the impact of the pandemic on various groups, here I say to myself, the answer is edX, right? I'm wondering in terms of disruption in Anant, I think the last time I interviewed you, I didn't mention this, but I had dinner. I won't mention the university because I don't want to get blocked from campus, but very prominent president of university who basically said, we're not going to change. I asked him, I said, what kinds of disruptions are coming? He said, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing the way we've been doing it. It was a very kind of flat earth response, I thought, to my question about what kinds of things are going to come and challenge university before the pandemic. And now when I kind of look at the disruptions that are coming and sort of asking, what are the great platforms out there? It looks like edX-like platforms or 2U-like platforms, are clearly part of that. But Anant, how do you look at, you're at MIT, and so you look at a large-scale, kind of expensive, high-octane, high-end university, but there's a very rich educational establishment. When you listen to Mamie and when she's sort of looking at how certain communities have been negatively impacted and how the value equation is being rethought. What are your thoughts on how you can bridge what Mamie is seeing in her data and how we can still deliver an inclusive educational outcome in the end without necessarily having everybody go to MIT?
It's not, these are not two extremes, but, high quality education at a top university or a broad education to a large number of people online can really work together very closely. We have 37 million learners learning on edX. And universities like MIT and Harvard and Berkeley and Oxford and Cambridge and companies like Google and Amazon are offering courses and learnings on edX. And these are all top-notch, high-quality education. And frankly, even on campuses, students are using online learning materials in their day-to-day studies. And this is not just during the pandemic. I'll give you a number. At MIT, for instance, well before the pandemic, 99% of undergraduates were using the edX platform in their learning on campus as part of the normal education. And of course, when the pandemic hit, everything went on high octane. It was as if we turbocharged the whole online effort, where faculty and students from being in the minority in terms of using online learning routinely went to using online learning 100%. And even many of my colleagues who were very reticent before about online learning have now become familiar with online learning, both students and faculty. And because of that, by and large, there's more familiarity. And to all of us, once we get more familiar, we also get more comfortable with pretty much anything, particularly technology. And so what COVID has done is that it has forced everybody to become comfortable with digital technology and online learning. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a new normal, where the new normal for education, even on campuses, is going to be blended. I predict that over the next 3 years, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if about half the learning on campus became online and about half became in person, where we really had a future, a blended learning future in colleges. And many studies have shown that blended learning, research has shown, data has shown, our own data and that of others, that blended learning, where you combine the best of in-person and online, is better than purely in-person or purely online. And I think that is the future.
Appreciate it. Maybe just last a question for you. I'm just wondering if you have any from the data and the world you're in. It's at the Institute for Higher Educational Policy, whether or not you folks have cracked the code on continual education and retraining. One of the things we've seen with the impact that technology has on any economy is it creates displacement. One of the things I think we have not been great at is helping to, one, destigmatize those changes and disruptions in people's work and giving them healthy and real opportunities in educational experience and a different kind of credentialing that's positive. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if I'm framing it right, but I know that that's one of this country's biggest challenges. And as you talked about value, as you talked about these different dimensions, I'm wondering if you have any insights from a policy perspective of how we need to begin thinking about that.
Absolutely. I think the point here of disruption and this being a moment of disruption is exactly right. And it ties into this point around credentialing. And I think that raises many of these equity considerations as well in terms of value. One of the most important aspects that we'll need to keep an eye on as a policy community, as practitioners, as we continue this shift towards online learning and continue the work past this moment of disruption, is to ensure that the value really is accruing equitably to students across race, income, and gender lines. You mentioned earlier a conversation with a college president who said that we're not going to change. I would suppose that's probably a pretty selective institution that enrolls many white students, many non-low-income students. And so if that's the pathway that some in this country have access to, while we then have different pathways for Black or Latinx students, for Indigenous students, or for students from low-income backgrounds, that translates into enormous gaps in terms of the economic mobility that we can see within society and the economic returns to a post-secondary credential. And so I think we need to ensure from a policy standpoint that the various avenues are open equitably to people and that we're not seeing increased stratification within our system as a result.
Phil, if I might add very quickly, to your point about lifelong continuous learning and credentialing, I think in terms of policy and credentialing, I think radical new modular credentials are critical. So as an example, working with our university partners, edX has launched credentials like microbachelors and micromasters. And just like the name implies, these are small modular credentials that give you a piece of a degree, where in the future, getting a full degree may not be as important as getting a piece of a degree and maybe stacking up these pieces with credentials along the way so that you could learn, let's say for 6 months, get a microbachelor's and then go and get a job. And then while you're working, you could be continuously learning additional microbachelors or micromasters and stacking them up and eventually getting a full degree. And today, our whole system is so antediluvian, it boggles my mind. What system do you know where if you work for 2 years as opposed to 4 years and then you leave, you are called a dropout? Why don't we give people a credential for a piece of work so that they can go and get a job? When our system needs so much work, and I think this idea of modular credentials will enable this continuous lifelong learning where people can upskill and earn credentials like micromasters to showcase on the resume, on the LinkedIn profiles, get promotions, and continue their studies and learning throughout life.
And I'll tell both of you, you have an open invitation to come in and talk about it. I just find it so such a positive take on how to move from something that's sort of one and done to something that we're going to have to do. We're going to have to get there, at some level. But Anant Agarwal, founder and CEO of edX, Mamie Voight, Interim President, Institute for Higher Education Policy. I love this conversation. Thank you so much. I hope you'll both be back. Really enjoyed it. And Anant, congratulations on all the things you continue to do. And look forward to having you both back to discuss this. Thanks.